Jinhsi has impressively managed to hold the role of best DPS in the game ever since her initial release. But why is that? Let's talk about it. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. Let's start off by taking a look at our two main competitors, the esteemed Carlotta and everybody's favorite crazy lady Camellia. All three of these DPS champions have really high potential. However, there's one key thing that separates Jinhsi among them all quite clearly. That would be that there is quite literally no situation that she is weak to, if you will. Obviously, there's spectral res on bosses, but I more so mean flaws gameplay-wise. Camellia is incredibly powerful at the cost of having limited movement, which can make her really annoying against bosses which zip around the place a lot, such as Thundering Mephis. There's an inherent handicap to your gameplay that you have to deal with. Carlotta is nothing short of an incredible unit, with damage potential that reaches insane heights, easily an S-tier DPS unit. And while she can certainly manage herself just fine in AoE, it's certainly not her strong suit. She's very tuned for single enemy encounters, that much is quite obvious. She excels at those at the cost of being less tuned to AoE. So despite brand new DPSs coming out over time which have certainly challenged Jinhsi's throne, bringing plenty of damage potential with them, none have quite been able to topple her off of her #1 spot, because no matter what, the almighty Magistrate of Jinzhou has consistently been able to take on every single new combat scenario that the game has thrown at her with extreme ease. Literally, the only way to handicap her would be to add spectral res to the boss that she's fighting. Both Camellia and Carlotta have excellent ease of use, but so does the Magistrate. This ability to be adaptable to literally every single type of battle scenario has really helped in maintaining her #1 spot over time. Plus, the damage she does remains as huge as ever even to this day. I will briefly mention that in multi-wave scenarios, her nukes can feel a bit overkill, but this is a much less significant flaw as opposed to Camellia's limited movement on Carlotta's general AoE performance. Kuro hasn't introduced any major Jinhsi counters yet, aside from the aforementioned spectral res. That could always change in the future, but as we've seen from the start of 1.1 all the way up until 2.0, there has been no such thing as a challenge that Jinhsi cannot handle. Have buffs over time done much for her lofty meta position? Well, she came out in 1.1, and the main buff to her performance was judged in 1.2. People also figured out a little while after her initial release that Yuan Wu was a highly competent free-to-play friendly option for her. Jojo was huge for her, seeing as she was released specifically to be Jinhsi's main dedicated best-in-stall support at the time. Yes, the glacial buffing was wasted on her, but the skill percent and high volume of coordinated attacks to build stacks on the Magistrate were an absolute dream. The synergy was a match made in the Imperator-ordained heaven. However, since 1.2, there weren't any more specific buffs that came Jinhsi's way. I suppose there was 5-piece Empyrean coming out, which became the Silly Painter's new best-in-slot, and when you use Empyrean on her, the Magistrate's best-in-slot setup goes from being 3-cost Spectro attack to 3-cost Spectro, so that's a relevant change. Otherwise, everything else remained relatively the same. After all, if it's already broken, don't break it even more. However, it's exactly because she's remained the same for quite a while that it's so impressive that she's still so good. Camellia recently got Roshi added to her teams, yet she still falls behind the almighty Magistrate of Jinzhou. In fairness, the Clown Kid isn't really an impressive unit, especially down at S0. With that being said, Jinhsi's best-in-slot team still beats out the best-in-slot comps of her other main competitors. And consider that Carlotta takes full advantage of Jojo's outro skill, as opposed to the Magistrate who only utilizes half of it. Dude, I don't even want to know the insane damage that she'd be capable of doing if granted that level of spectral percent on top of those skill percent buffs, because in her current state, she's only utilizing the skill percent buffs. So even if she hasn't received a ton of new gear over time, she still beats out characters who have arguably more synergistic teams than her, along with units who did indeed gain new significant buffs. There's also the fact that she has better free-to-play friendly teams than Carlotta. Using Sanhua or Yang Yang with the Montelli Lady can indeed yield excellent results. However, Jinhsi with Yuan Wu is more synergistic while also being cheap. I'm not gonna fault Camellia here, because she utilizes Sanhua incredibly well. Another important thing to point out would be that Jinhsi has no specific competition in her main niche. Big, giant Spectro nuker that can handle every type of content in the game, with minor multi-wave drawbacks. After all, how in the world could you form competition up against such a meta behemoth without totally breaking the game? The only way she could age was well, since Kuro allowed her to utterly dominate the meta freely. Other 5-star characters did see some genuine competition over time, such as Yinlin no longer being as good of a pull, because you could consider pulling for other 5-star second-slot characters such as Jojo instead. However, I'm sure that we're all acutely aware that none other than the sweet and lovely Phoebe was announced to be releasing in Wuthering Waves 2.1, and as we all know, she's going to be a Spectral character. So does that mean that Jinhsi's going to be facing challenge as this game's top DPS? I'm actually going to present a unique angle here. No, I don't think so, because in my opinion, the fact that they're both Spectral characters actually doesn't matter all that much. Besides, we don't even know what Phoebe's going to be yet, but assuming that she's a DPS, All the element means is that spectral-resistant enemies are going to laugh in their faces, and that they'll be able to use any spectral-related gear in the future. What really matters in terms of power creep is who can use the same teammates best. If they were both JoJo users, and Phoebe ended up having higher damage potential than the Magistrate, then I would be worried. However, as it stands, we have no officially released information which would imply that she'd be sniping the Magistrate's best installed teammates. Not to mention how their playstyles could end up being totally different as well. Jinhsi is an every woman, a character who will succeed no matter what scenario you slot her into. We don't even know yet how flexible and versatile Phoebe will be in what amount of combat scenarios. That could be another factor which separates them as units, thus further separating the teammates that they would use best. High chances are that Phoebe is going to utilize a very different playstyle to Jinhsi, which will allow her to flourish in her own right. A new, good Spectral character coming out doesn't suddenly mean that all old Spectral units are bad. The element of a character only matters due to resistances and what potential teammates they both use. If a Spectral Frazzle set that doesn't have any users at the moment tells us anything, it's that these two are certainly going to play very differently. Of course, if you have one Spectral DPS, it's better to get another element DPS so that you can be prepared for more scenarios, in case your account suddenly gets cooked by the current resistances on enemies in the TOA. However, if you already have a Magistrate and want to pull for Phoebe, then don't worry. I'm 100% sure that they'll probably be able to coexist on an account. Even if they hypothetically did end up using the same teammates, Jinhsi has so many viable alternative options for her teams that you'd still be able to put something together for her that's good. You'll love to see it. Besides, I think that Phoebe has the potential to cover for Jinhsi's only minor weak point, that being multi-wave scenarios. So there's a high chance that the two religious ladies will be able to coexist wonderfully, even while both wielding the power of light. For those reasons, I believe that the Magistrates will continue to be a valuable unit even going into the future. There's also the fact that her high Astrite-based investment is nothing to sneeze at either. Most character sequence lineups in this game are nice bonuses, but nothing too huge. Jinhsi, on the other hand, has one of the most insane lineups in the entire game. When you string together the buffs that they provide, the unit goes from being broken to absolutely earth-shattering. And this is under the assumption that you're only going up to S2 to 3. We're not even talking about S4 to 6 here. Not to mention how Ages of Harvest is a fantastic broadblade in general. Because this game heavily encourages weapon sharing, that makes Ages a fantastic long-term weapon pickup. So if you weren't already convinced of her future-proofness, then you have multiple copies or her signature weapon to turn to, which only seal the deal further. There is literally no losing with this unit. My final verdict on the matter is that this character was designed to be a meta powerhouse right from the very beginning. Kuro is going to have an extremely hard time kicking her out of the meta. I believe that the only next true challenger we will be seeing is going to be the next Sentinel Resonator. These powerful units seem to host a power level of their own, featuring minimal flaws gameplay-wise, while presiding over the entire meta. Whether she's going to remain good after we get rinascita Sentinel Resonator is yet to be seen, but to be honest, I have a hard time believing that, in a game where having 3 well-built teams is preferable, one new unit coming out will totally kill off the old one. Besides, we have no clue as to whether the next Sentinel Resonator is a DPS character or not, and I doubt that they would share Jinhsi's element, or use the exact same teammates as her. I do like that we have such a reliable character in the meta. It's always nice to have a character that everyone can rely on to be strong and competent. Everyone is always going to be able to turn to her if they're a newer player looking for an excellent first-time pull, and it's great that older players have a broken DPS that they can always fall back on for difficult content in the foreseeable future. I am curious as to whether Sentinel Resonators are all always going to be at the top of the meta, or as to whether they will only be the very best during their dedicated spotlight period, if you will. I do think that even if the next one overshadows Jinhsi performance-wise, she'll still be seeing use on accounts for Ages of Harvest. Hilarity. Anyways, surpassing this unit will be a really difficult task, because as we've already established throughout this video, she is good for reasons other than only her big damage numbers too. She encapsulates every quality that makes a Wuthering Waves character strong, and that's nothing short of extremely impressive. Definitely looking forward to seeing how the next Sentinel Resonator is going to break the game. And oh boy, you just know that I'll be there if Kuro ever decides to create a JoJo that offers Spectral % buffing on outro as well. To be honest, there's no such thing as a Wuthering Waves unit aging to the point of being terrible. Sure, there's losing value over time, but there's not really any definitive power creep. It also helps that the power level of characters is quite dynamic in relation to an individual player's own skill level, which can make up a big difference in terms of damage output. However, even in a game where the meta is so fair and slow moving in terms of power creep, it's pretty easy to acknowledge when one particular unit is simply a large cut above the rest, and that's the case of Jinhsi. Sure, she definitely has viable competition these days, and if someone were to try defend Camellia or Carlotta being better than her, I'd hear the person out, because the idea isn't asinine. But even with those competitors being around, Jinzhou's Magistrate is fundamentally very hard to power creep. Being future-proof in a gacha game where characters cost either a lot of time or a lot of money to acquire, or even both, is one of the best things that you can be. Praise be to Jinzhou's almighty Magistrate, saving Wuthering Waves accounts in the past, present, and future. Truly the one who holds time in their hands. But what do you think about Jinhsi? Has she aged like fine wine in your opinion? Or do you think that recent releases are giving her a run for her shell credits? Let me know down below, I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, I have a ZZZ second channel. Head on over and subscribe if you're interested in some fun, silly ZZZ content. I'd also like to mention that I stream on Twitch. I stream once a week, every week on Saturdays, starting from 3 PM UK time. Come along so that we can play Wuthering Waves, ZZZ, and do some other fun stuff together. Hopefully this video was able to tell you why I personally think that Jinhsi has aged so well. This has been Juice, signing out, and shoot. Maybe she hasn't actually aged that well at all. She already has white hair in her 20s.